I tried every kind of explanation there was.
What happened? Did little green men come down and...
No, not at all. I woke up in the middle of the night in this strange situation. I was no longer in bed. I was in a little room, and there were these dark figures moving around. It was very noisy. They fired a needle into the side of my head and things, and
Wow.
It was a little bit of interaction with them that I described in the book Communion. And afterwards, I reacted like a trauma victim rather than a person who had a nightmare or a seizure or something. And indeed, when I was tested, there was never anything at all wrong with me, except the psychological test showed that I was under a lot of stress from some kind of trauma.
What about the needle mark from when they implanted
that was there
in you?
In fact, one of the other incidents involved a needle going up my nose.
Oh.
And I had a white mark in my brain that is in the book.
Well, would you say that these aliens, for the most part, are nasty characters who like to come down and poke humans with needles?
I have no idea if they're exactly how to answer that, because I don't know what this all means.
Right.
All I know is this, that, for example, doctors, people are going to doctors and saying they're having implants in their bodies, and they're getting x-rayed, and there's doctors removing the objects.
Now, we're not talking about breast augmentation implants. We're talking about radio transmitter implants.
We don't know what we're talking about, little objects that are unexplained. They're not certainly like breast augmentation implants. I wish they were. Then they would be easy to explain. But instead, it's creepy. It's very creepy. And the fact that government in the States, at least, is just totally in denial about it is disturbing.
So you believe that there are aliens among us?
I believe that there's somebody who's doing this to us, and it's getting really provocative when it's happening, you know, that people are having this happen to their children and so forth.
Why don't the aliens just hold a press conference and say, look, we're here, we want to be friends and get along, instead of doing all of this?
There were two scientists who explained why, if extraterrestrials were here, they'd be extremely secretive. They explained that in a very prestigious magazine called Science, a magazine of science, back in 1977, and I think they were probably right.
Now, we have some tape. I want you to explain the tape as we look at the visuals of it now. What is this?
This is a apparent UFO hanging over Mexico City in the afternoon of August the 6th, 1997. We have examined this tape. I have been there to the scene. The event happened. It was physical. And the flight characteristics of this object cannot be explained.
It looks like it's having a bit of engine trouble. And
well, it's moving very slowly. This is the same thing done in negative to try to see if we could, any wires or things connected to it would come out more clearly if in this. This is just one of many things that was done to try to determine whether or not this thing was a fake.
How many people saw this?
They've interviewed about 50 people who saw it.
Only 50?
Well, only 50. I mean, that's just of the people they interviewed just at random in the streets. They probably, it's hard to know how many people would have seen it, 100, a couple of hundred maybe. We know of, in one of the apartment buildings, it was noon, and there were people actually at home at lunch, which is a more common custom in Mexico than it is here.
I have to ask you, what should we do if we suspect a co-worker, a friend, or God forbid, a loved one is an alien?
I've never had that question asked me, and I don't know how to answer it.
Very interesting. Well, are there any things that you can do
well, I think you would expect them to look somewhat different from you.
So they don't look like us?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
The reports that people get in the book, I mean, there's a whole section on testimony, and there's even a section, an interview with a Monsignor from the Vatican who talks about this and says, why are we kidding ourselves? Essentially, the evidence is there. Let's just face it.
Okay, Whitley Strieber, the book is called Confirmation, the Hard Evidence of Aliens Among Us. Next.
UFOs over Mexico, unexplained implants, alien-human hybrids. Sounds like the X-Files, but Whitley Strieber says he has confirmation. Tonight on Jane Houghton Live, are there aliens among us?
Stand by, Canada. Now you can talk to the newsmakers and have your say. This is Jane Houghton Live.
I'm Jane Houghton. He's been called crazy and a liar since he claimed in his book Communion that he'd had a close encounter in 1985. But tonight's guest says those of us who aren't paranoid about the possibility of alien intelligence are the ones who need a reality check. Since going public with his story, Whitley Strieber says he's received well over 100,000 testimonials from people detailing strange encounters of their own. He's investigated some of the most compelling stories and says he now has physical proof that someone or something is out there. Whitley Strieber's newest book is called Confirmation, The Hard Evidence of Aliens Among Us. He's in the studio. Welcome.
Hi.
It's nice to talk to you again.
Well, it's good to be here.
Yeah, let's go back so that for people who aren't familiar with your original story from Communion about what you experienced in your cabin in upstate New York.
Okay, in December of 1985, I had a close encounter. I woke up in the middle of the night, no longer in my bed in my cabin, but in a little room, a little round room. It was very noisy. There was a lot of activity around me. There was a brief interaction. I began screaming. A voice started saying, "What can we do to help you stop screaming?" It sounded like a tape that was being played again and again. And eventually, someone fired a needle into the side of my head and I blacked out. Mm-hmm. The next day, I was like a rape victim recovering from an extraordinary trauma. I went to the doctor, and after about a month or a month and a half of every kind of test known to man, I was eventually left facing the fact that it was really an unknown experience. And that was the beginning of this.
Mm-hmm. Now, through this, I'm trying to remember now whether anything ever happened to your wife.
Not to my wife, no. It was, in a sense, it was more disturbing than that, because our son, who was then just a little 7-year-old, began reporting that this was happening to him even when we were still thinking it was some kind of mental breakdown on my part, mm-hmm. and that we were keeping it incredibly private. It was not discussed in front of the child at all.
Right.
And he suddenly began to say, "Who are these little doctors who come into my room in the night and shine lights on me?"
And that was pretty alarming for you.
It was frightful.
Yeah. Now, so to this day, your wife hasn't had any of these experiences, even though she has at times been in the bed beside you when things have happened.
Oh, often. No, my wife has never had this experience, but I don't know that I see what you're driving at. And in fact, in the 250,000 letters we've gotten, it turns out that family groups more often than not have the experience together. And also, we've had as many as 17 people at our cabin, and 11 of them had experiences at the same time, or contiguous experiences. Mm-hmm. So the fact that my wife has been left out of it is not, I don't think, any reason to assume that there's something invalid about what's happened to me.
Actually, that wasn't what I was driving at. What I was driving at was this must be awfully difficult in a relationship when you've gone through something and she's been there at the same time and hasn't had those experiences. I mean, there must have been doubts in her mind.
It's been easier.
It's been easier?
Easier.
Why?
And it's been easier because the doubts are very welcome. Before this happened to me, I would have laughed in the face of anyone who claimed it was real. Mm-hmm. And frankly, my wife preserves the skepticism from our past that was healthy then and it's healthy now. It's her skepticism that has kept my books full of question and has made me adhere to a standard of evidence that's that is validating rather than running off in every direction and assuming this or that or the other theory must be the truth.
Mm-hmm. Now, but this whole issue really has consumed your life since those experiences.
Unfortunately, yes. I have wanted to solve the problem and to answer the questions.
So do you wish that you hadn't had this experience?
Often. But not always. It's like it's like climbing a mountain, you know. I mean, before you've started, you're dying to do it. Halfway up, you think you were a darn fool, but once you reach the summit, it's fabulous.
Right.
I'm somewhere on the side of the mountain right now.
All right, so then let's talk about what's happened between 1985 and now, between that time. And we've watched a lot happen, not just to you, but in terms of looking at the issues of UFOs.
Yes.
I mean, John Mack from Harvard has come out and written his books sort of supporting people who've had abduction experiences, saying he believes that the experiences are real.
Right.
And we've seen him face a lot. Some people think that he became too close to the issue and so therefore wasn't objective anymore.
Lost perspective.
Lost perspective entirely. And also some important UFO sightings and things that have happened. What do you look at as the milestones in that time period?
Well, the milestones, the biggest milestone in our life, my wife and myself, in our family life, were two things. One is, after Communion was published, we got 250,000 letters from people who had had similar, claimed to have had similar experiences, and that was awesome. Especially because many of these stories are so extraordinary that they're beyond imagination almost, exactly as it would be if they were real contact experiences. The second thing was the discovery of the implants that was, and that I was personally involved in that. And then there was also what began to happen over Mexico, and the sense of there being a kind of communication attempt taking place of a kind that's just very, very different from what we might think of, but still has a validity to it and a sense to it.
Right.
When the Mexican people sort of looked up, there was a UFO sighting over Mexico City during an eclipse, and then the television guy asked for people to send in video. People began to search the skies. They began to take more and more videos, and soon there was thousands of hours of video, a lot of which could not be explained.
And especially what happened on August 6, 1997. We have some of that footage from Mexico City. I mean, this is pretty compelling video.
It's a remarkable piece of video. We've studied this.
Where you see this UFO, and you see it in perspective with a building, which is is important.
And it moves up at an angle toward the building, and then slowly moves along this above the buildings, going behind a structure on top of one of the buildings, and it disappears.
Right.
From view. It's never seen again in the video. We studied this video quite carefully. A number of different video analysis people did, and no one could find anything wrong with it. I went down to Mexico to do on-the-ground research with Jaime Maussan, the man who had originally done the research in Mexico, and talked to people who had seen the object, because of course the critical thing here is, was it there or was it a digital inlay? Was it an animation? The object was there. We can tell also that it wasn't put onto the film digitally. We've tested it for that. We have analyzed things like the amount of lift available from hydrogen and helium based on the size of the object and so on and so forth. And we found that if it was light enough, it could have been held aloft by by hydrogen. But then its motion would have been different. So if it's a hoax, it's a brilliant hoax done by an engineer with extraordinary skill. And with a lot of luck as well.
Yeah. There's a certain irony about it, though, because, I mean, all along the skeptics have said, you know, if there are so many UFOs, why haven't we gotten, like, a really good video footage of it? And now that there is good video footage, then it's immediately, well, it must have been a hoax perpetrated because they knew so many people were going to be looking into the sky because there was an eclipse happening.
The skeptics have mostly been pretty silent about this one. There's a silence developing in the skeptical community that will, I think, grow until it's getting kind of loud in a way. Except to point out the fact that the people who made the video have remained anonymous. They haven't said much about this video.
Why?
Because there's nothing much to say about it. It's hard to say it isn't authentic.
Right.
That's the problem. It can't be dismissed. You can't call it a flock of ducks or the planet Venus or whatever they usually say it is.
All right, so when we're posing the question, are there aliens among us? You answer it with?
Possibly. Very possibly. It's worth looking into. It's worth spending some time and money to try to find out. Because if it's true, then as I point out in the book, based on some ideas derived from an article in Science magazine in April of 77, there is every reason to expect that they would be extremely secretive. And therefore, every reason for us to try to make a proactive effort to find out what is going on, if only to gain the benefit of the technology that they're leaving, that is fallout from their presence here.
Now, in this particular book, unlike others, this one doesn't have a lot about you, but you do detail an incident that happened in 1995.
Yes, I certainly do.
And this is a curious one because the beings that you see seem to be human.
They certainly did. They seemed very human.
And men in black.
Well, they weren't in black. They weren't in, I don't recall them as what color their clothes were. They may have been in black. It's possible.
Young woman in black.
So it was a woman in black.
There you
go.
go.
Good. At least it was a woman. Let me tell you the story. It was in May of 1995, and we were living in a cabin in upstate New York, isolated situation. The windows were open in our bedroom, which overlooked the backyard on one side and the driveway on the other. I heard a car in the driveway, and I immediately, it woke me out of a sleep because no car should be there. It was a real danger signal, frankly. The gates were locked, and it scared me. I immediately started to jump up to turn on the outside lights. I heard a voice in the backyard say, "Condition red." I then saw the woman and a man standing behind her in the doorway of the room.
Of your bedroom?
Of the bedroom. They came toward me. Everything went black, and I can remember them moving me around. I can remember a lot of pressure on my left ear. I remember the sense of another presence in the room, but it was unclear to me. And the next thing I knew, it was morning. My wife had not been disturbed, and at first I thought it was just a dream. But then we found that some odd things were present. The alarm system was still turned on, but the garage door was wide open, and the system was not ringing, which was really strange. There were some other things around the house that didn't add up. But we sort of, I just didn't, there was nothing to think about it or say. I described the whole experience to her, as I always do after these happen. And then later that afternoon, my ear began to hurt, and I touched it and found a little bump on the back of my ear that had not been there before. I knew the stories about implants. They were no secret to me. The next thing I heard, about 3 or 4 months later, I heard of Roger Lear and the work he was doing in removing implants. I decided to have it removed. When we tried that, though, the doctor opened it up. He said it's a white disc, and he made an attempt to remove it, but when he touched it with the scalpel, it moved from where it had been fixed in the ear down a short distance below that. He said it moved, but he could still see a corner of it, and he nicked a corner of it off with the scalpel, whereupon it moved about an inch down into the ear, into an entirely different area of my ear. Whereupon he put a glove on my hand and said, "Feel it." And I felt it, and it was way down in the bottom part of my ear. And yet it had been tightly fixed, immobile, in the place it had originally. He sutured it. We had the object piece tested. It proved to be collagen with crystals of calcium carbonate in it, which is not a disease as far as we know. A few days after the sutures were out, the object moved back to its original position, which is where it is now.
And it's still there?
Still there.
Okay. We'll talk more about that when we come back. Are there aliens among us? Whitley Strieber is our guest. When we come back, we'll see an example of what he calls the physical proof of alien interference. The phone lines are open at 1-800-510-JANE, or you can email us at jane@electric-tv.com. This is Jane Houghton Live. Could there be intelligent alien life out there? Our guest is Whitley Strieber. His new book is called Confirmation. Let's go to the phone lines and talk to Michelle, who's calling from Ontario. Hi, Michelle.
Hi, Jane.
Hi.
Whitley.
Hi.
Yeah, I'm a provincial section director for the Mutual UFO Network for Sudbury, Ontario. And since 1974, I've had 12 separate sightings of UFOs. I have never seen an alien, but I know people who have, and had nothing to do with abductions. And so I believe that we are definitely being visited. Within the last 4 years, there was an alien being that was seen near Kadima in Israel, and they found footprints.
And so what do you think about this? I mean, do you find it alarming or what?
50-50. I've met up with a lot of skeptics. I have a lot of people that are on my side, and lots of people in Sudbury have had sightings in the past 40 years or more, and I've been collecting news clippings, and yes, I think that it's kind of scary, even for a person such as myself who's been doing research for 22 years.
Yep.
You know, it's a lot to swallow for the person who's never seen anything, but the evidence is overwhelming, and all they have to do is take a look at it. And it's not, it's not really hard because most of the work has already been done. Most of the cases have been very well documented and collected.
Yes, he's right. There are lots of really good cases out there. It's time to. We've ended up in two camps. One saying yes, 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 the other saying no, 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 and we don't get anywhere.
Right.
Let's forget that and just start studying it to figure out so that he and I can get an answer to this extraordinary and quite wonderful question. What is going on here?
But don't you think the issue of alien abduction has confused a lot of this, though? That once the stories about alien abduction started coming out, there was, I think, such a similarity for a lot of psychologists looking at this with, with repressed memory, with tales of satanic ritual, that they seem to get lumped into the same category.
Yes,
and I think a lot of questions are being raised about whether, again, it's something that's happening through the therapeutic hypnotic process that's causing these memories to come forward.
Well, at the same time, the vast majority of people who wrote us were never involved in any hypnosis or therapy or aware of MUFON or, the Mutual UFO Network or anything like that. So when you get, when you reach beyond the sort of ghetto that we have ended up in, which is what that book did, what Communion did, we find that out there are a large number of people having experiences so strange that they fulfill Carl Sagan's criteria that he laid down, one of his criteria back in the 70s, that if it is really alien contact, it will be stranger than the strangest things we could possibly imagine.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk to June, who's calling from BC. Hi, June.
Oh, hi.
Hi.
I have seen UFOs quite a number of times. Once when I was driving the children from a soccer game, we all saw it very close. It was awesome. We chased it, and it went straight up and disappeared. Another time when my husband was a physician, and we lived on the outskirts of the university in Edmonton, and we saw this very bright light. And when we went to look, it disappeared, but there were burn marks on the grass and everything. My husband was involved in tracking these UFOs with the armed forces, and they chased a number of them, but they could never catch them because they always went straight up and disappeared. And I've had another...
And what was the official military response if your husband was working with them?
Well, it was secret, and of course he couldn't tell me about it.
Well, one of the...
Because, they are tracking this, but they will never give you the information of what results or what. But all I know is that they could never catch, so I was told. But I've also had an experience where I was watching, I thought it was a satellite, and it sort of stopped, zigzagged around, and it was a strobe light that came down. And that frightened me, and of course I ran indoors. But there is something, but I almost feel that it is some of the country's military experimentation, because I also feel that we're just energy forms, and we're made out of, atoms and cells and material. And so when we die, I do believe we just are a piece of energy that floats around. So even if you want to think you're going to find something on another planet, we will be just energy forms maybe on that planet, but we can't see them and they can't see us.
Okay, well, that's what your belief is about this, but...
Yeah, rather than go into our belief systems, it's a little early for that. The thing we need to do is to find out what's actually happening. What is actually happening, because after all, many of the video of the phenomena that she describes seeing has been videotaped in different parts of the world. The same precise process of something flying along and then suddenly shooting straight up in the sky and disappearing. What is that? Or the most recent video from Mexico, which has just happened last March, where there's a video taken from the ground of 150 UFOs maneuvering in the sky at the same time. A mind-boggling piece of material. I've just seen it a few days ago.
All right, let's go back and talk about the implants, because I think for you this is, because it's tactile, it's something you can get your hands on. For you this is quite real. Now, you talked about your own implant in your ear, and that you didn't go to Roger Lear, you went to someone else.
I went to a doctor in San Antonio who I did not tell beforehand it was an implant, but he knew my work.
Right.
And during the surgery he realized what he was probably looking at, and afterwards he said, you know, what's happened here is I've busted an alien implant. I said, yeah, John, that's probably true. He said, well, can you tell me what's going to happen to me? I said, I have no idea, but fortunately he's been fine.
Right. Now, but Roger Leir, I know that in one interview that I saw with you, you considered him to be a hero, right?
Yes, I think of him as a hero because Roger was the first doctor, the first medical person to say, well, okay, if these people say these things are in their bodies and they've got x-rays, let's take them out and see what they look like. No one else was ever willing to do that.
I find that hard to believe. Because, I mean, doctors are pretty curious people. I would think
it's fantastic.
And the other thing is that Roger Leir is a podiatrist.
Yes, but he works with a general surgeon who does not wish to be identified. The general surgeon doesn't wish to be identified because he's afraid of what might happen to his career. Roger is a very upfront type of guy. He doesn't think that way. I mean, he doesn't care. He's going to just blast ahead no matter what. The doctor in San Antonio was willing to be identified too, but only in the context of just that he'd done this surgery for an ordinary medical reason.
Right. But that doesn't. But this is the part that doesn't make any sense. I mean, if
I don't see why not.
Well, but if these are implants, just curiosity. But there's got to be lots of scientists.
Well, look what happened to John Mack when he came out and just suggested the possibility that this might be real. They tried to revoke his tenure and his license to practice psychiatry. In other words, these people were so cruel that they were willing to try to leave this man penniless on a street corner for having talked about this. Lear's license was briefly challenged in California. Of course they're scared.
But I'm sure that you've seen the same documentary that was done about Mack that I have, where it certainly looks as though he's letting his belief system get in the way.
That was done by Nova, and it was an outrage. That documentary, among other things, it claims falsely that some of the witnesses, that all of the witnesses remembered their experiences only under hypnosis. That happens not to be true of a number of the witnesses who were in the documentary. It was a poor job. It was an embarrassment, and I think they should be ashamed of it.
But don't you think John Mack should be embarrassed as well? I mean,
no, absolutely not.
Come on, there were parts of that footage where he's interrogating you know, someone who's supposed to have been gone through this under hypnosis, and he's asking leading questions that are totally inappropriate for a psychiatrist to be asking.
Well, I don't know.
I mean, if you're seriously trying to get information.
But remember that remember the way that it was taken out. Mack claims that those segments were taken out of context in order to make him look bad, and I know him well. And I would prefer to believe him rather than to believe people who, in other parts of the things of the documentary, made claims about other witnesses which were not true and were at variance with what those witnesses had said. So therefore, I think that the documentary is probably a skillful editing job that makes Mack look bad, and it's unfair.
Yeah, but the difficulty is, and I'm sure you've seen it yourself when you, in the UFO community, that the belief system does get in the way.
The problem,
and things get shifted to fit into what the belief system is.
You make an extremely good point. It works both ways. The believers and the skeptics filter the data to make it fit their theories. And this is what we must stop doing, especially if there's an intelligence behind the data which is playing with us to some degree, which may be the case. So
let's talk about the implants. This is a clip, I think, that from some surgery that Roger Leir did.
Yes.
And this is on an arm of
arm of a man's arm, and this is being done by the general surgeon that was working with Dr. Leir, and you'll hear Dr. Leir's voice in the background. So we believe they've just removed the object. That's the object removed from the man's arm.
Right. And what did it turn out to be?
Meteoric iron.
Son of a gun, it looks just like...
Very similar to the other one.
The same...
Yeah, they've just done a...
Same
This is the second in a series of what would be three. And this is very similar to one that had been in another, a black seed-like object that had been in another person's, I believe, leg. And they both turned out to be made of the same material, and yet these two people were from different places entirely.
And have there been similar things found in other people? 6
objects have been found made of the same material, yes.
Do we know what it is?
Yeah, it's iron. It's ordinary iron. The lab that analyzed 3 of them speculated that the iron was meteoric because of certain mineral components in it. But what it would be doing in people's arms, legs, hands, and feet, God only knows.
Right. A skeptic would say, well, they probably fell down when they were kids and it's got embedded under the skin.
It's not good enough. Where are the scars? Where are the signs of some kind of contusion or abrasion? Why have the objects never been rejected from their bodies, and why are you getting similar things all from a group of people who claim to have had close encounters and had these objects put into them? It's a weak response. I think a far more intelligent response is, we don't know what this is. Let's find out, because it's happening to people. It's coming into their bodies, and it must be addressed in a sane and rational manner rather than with a lot of hysteria.
Right. But the difficulty, I guess, that would be that even if you got your wish, and I don't know what you'd want it to be, a scientific body or a government body.
A scientific group outside of the government, far from the government.
That would actually look at this material.
And would actually tell us the truth about what happened.
Right. But wouldn't they just look at this and say, well, it's iron. There's nothing, there's nothing extraterrestrial about this material that we found here.
But that's not the problem. It isn't, the fact that the material can be identified isn't too surprising. The problem is, why is it in these people at all, number one? And number two, is there any technology associated with it that we don't understand? And there's a strong suggestion that this may be the case, because in some of these cases, the nervous system of the person had grown around the object on its own, and we don't have any idea how to make the nerves grow. We do. We're getting close to understanding this, but we don't know now. And certainly, when these objects were removed in 1996, no one had a clear idea of how to make that happen.
When we come back, we'll take more of your calls and your email for Whitley Strieber. You're with Jane Houghton Live. Hello, I'm Jane Houghton. Our guest tonight is close encounter expert Whitley Strieber. His newest book is called Confirmation. Let's talk to Penny, who's calling from Ottawa. Hi, Penny.
Hi, Jane. Hi, Mr. Strieber.
Hi.
I find your experiences fascinating, and I gather you're a repeat abductee, and that you've been abducted from your bedroom on more than one occasion.
No, I had one such abduction, and the rest of the experiences were all different.
Have you ever asked any of the people you've been in contact with who are repeat abductees if they've ever set up any recording equipment in their bedrooms so that they could record what happened?
Yes. That's been attempted by me many times, as you may imagine, and we were unable to get anything. We even had one situation where there was a camera crew in the house with a low-light camera specially designed to run all night. And while there were numerous people in the house who had a sequential series of encounters with this little creature that came in, we did not get anything on video. So it was I don't know how come. I went through this in detail in my book Breakthrough 2 books ago. So it has been attempted, and I have wanted to do it, and I think that it's important always in discussing this to remember that this is a matter in question. What is actually going on here may be very different from what it seems. And for me to sit here and try to make a case that this is proof of something would be a mistake. I have hard evidence that there's something going on that impacts people physically in the form of implants and so forth. But, for example, is there a relationship between the apparent implants and the abduction stories? We don't know for certain. We only know that that people who claim abduction stories end up with the objects in their bodies. But we don't understand that connection yet. There's a lot.
And you don't know what the objects are.
Above all, we don't know what the objects do. Do they do different things? Some of them are similar to one another. Others seem very different from those. What does that all mean? It's really, we're at the point where there's enough evidence to justify further study, but not enough evidence to say this is proof.
But what do people talk about when they have the implants removed, in terms of how their feelings change?
Not much. There has been one person who said that she felt a lack of intuition after the implant was removed. Other people felt relief. Others didn't feel any change, but it's so subjective. There's nothing there. there needs to be really detailed studies of people before, during, and after before we could say if there was any change. But most of all, we need to acquire an understanding of what, if any, technology may be associated with these objects to understand what they're doing.
Let's talk to John, who's calling from Vancouver. Hi, John.
Hi there, Jane.
Hi.
Hi, Whitley.
Hi.
Hi, Whitley. I don't want to dispute that what's happening is real. I've had contact with what I'd have to say two different things. And one, I guess, the first explanation I had is that the Greys, they were real. I mean, that experience was real. I had a really hard time remembering it. And I don't remember anything that they told me, my experience, except for I walked away with the fact knowing it was true and it happened, and that I should try to discover what happened to me on my own. Second kind of contact was with not physical things. They were like light beings that explained to me that in times of past we called them angels and demons, and that there is still a war being waged, and that these things are hyperdimensional things. Like Richard C. Hoagland has gone a long way to proving this model, and that what they're doing is through genetic engineering is taking material that physically is here and is starting to inhabit the realm that we sort of hold, or that is ours, and that this has been going on for a very, very long time. If we look at our ancient mythology, or even the Judeo-Christian model of heaven and hell and the upper realms, now we call them dimensions or beings of light or aliens, is that they're really no different than anything that humanity's ever had to face before. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, my first thought is this, that it's not time yet to theorize that deeply about this. What we need to do instead, I think, is for people to continue to describe their experiences and for more data to be acquired, preferably of the hard evidentiary kind, in an organized way at a professional level of acquisition, so carefully organized that it can be reported in the peer-reviewed scientific press, and to begin, therefore, to build an informational foundation that can lead us to an understanding of whether or not such theories are valid.
Yeah, but what are you leaning towards? I mean, the more you see.
I'm not leaning toward anything. I used to lean towards a lot of things, but I quit leaning because I want to stay with the question until I no longer have any trace of it left. I think that it's very important to stay with the question in this thing. But
what about the question about it being other governments?
Oh, I don't think so. I go into that.
So you've leaned away from that.
No, I go into that in some detail in the book, and the problem with it is that while it's true that the Central Intelligence Agency in the States has dabbled in mind control research, and in very negative ways, and ended up in court because of it. It's also true that what appears to be extremely sophisticated technology was recorded by professionals as early as the early 50s in the skies in the States. And I don't think that any government had anything like that then, because it would have changed the balance of power at a time when we were locked in an intensive struggle, and that did not happen.
Let's talk to Linda, who's calling from BC. Hi, Linda.
Hi, Jane. Hi, Whitley.
Hi.
I was just wondering, when you were speaking about the implant, and you said there are no scars or marks.
There are sometimes, but not always.
Okay, well, how do you find them on the body? Because I know you said sometimes they're on the arm or the leg.
Well, there's two ways. One is the witness may say that they remember where it was put. In other cases, there may be a raised area on the surface of the skin where you can feel something inside, and that can direct the doctor to x-ray that particular area. There's been one case where the much maligned hypnotic process proved out, in the sense that there was a witness who had been abducted and had no conscious memory of an implant, but under hypnosis remembered one being put in, and the area was x-rayed and it was found and removed.
And where was that?
In her calf muscle. In her calf muscle.
And what did that turn out to be?
One of the little iron pieces. So.
Let's talk to Debbie, who's calling from Toronto. Hi, Debbie.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, Jane. Hi, Whitley.
Hi.
Hi. What I wanted to ask you is, I do really support you, and I just wanted to ask you about experience. I had, it happened in Agincourt about 30 years ago, and it was in a new subdivision right beside a field. And what it was a family. I was out there visiting a family with my mother, and we were just talking. It was maybe about, I don't know, 8:30, 9 o'clock at night. and there was something hovering above the lamppost. It was like a very small spaceship, like maybe, I don't know, 2 foot square, and it just appeared to be listening to us. We could see it. We could see the lights, and it had been there for a while listening to us. And when we noticed it, it's just stayed there for about 5 minutes, and, you know, the kids are running around and everything, and it just took off in the field and disappeared. I just wondered if you've ever heard of anything like that happening.
Little bitty small objects are not uncommon. They're filtered out of the UFO literature because they're too weird and they don't seem sort of like spacecraft from another planet. But small objects and small lights, a la Tinkerbell, are reported very commonly. So this is not an unusual report. Seeing it for that long would be quite unusual.
Right. So what are the most typical descriptions that you hear? Either of the beings or of
Well, the most typical thing we hear about are lights coming into the house, into the room, and often seen...
Very bright lights.
Very bright light, concentrated lights moving through the room. Less often, stories of beings and creatures. Some of them, I go into quite a bit of detail about that in confirmation. Often these are familial groups like this lady, where the whole family is involved or groups of people are involved. It's much more common than people alone.
And so what did you see? What did the beings that you saw look like?
Well, I've seen the little creatures with the big black eyes, and I've seen some that had a dark blue clothing on that were very hard to distinguish exactly what they looked like. And I've had a few cases where there have been what appeared to be ordinary human beings in connection with my experience.
And what do you think they were? Were they human beings? Or?
I would assume so. I mean, I tend to think that something is what it looks like until I'm surprised. But that's what they seem to be, sure.
What would they be doing with the aliens, though?
Well, I don't know, but maybe the people who claim that there's a lot of genetic material or sexual material taken from them are telling the truth. And after all, since we've cloned a sheep,
you think these might be hybrids in some kind?
Who knows? I mean, if we went to another planet, among the things we would certainly do would be to obtain genetic material from the beings there. And if we were not convinced that they had the same dignity that we associate with human life, we might well clone them and examine them and treat them like lab rats. Not realizing, for example, that they were intelligent creatures.
Right. What about the stories, and you detail one of them, one man who was shown babies that he was told were his babies?
Yes, that's a commonplace of the experience. That is one of the things that needs to be studied and understood because it's obviously very disturbing to everyone involved with it, including Jesse Long, the gentleman who you refer to. People are shown these babies and they're told that this is their babies, and of course it's a heart-rending and bizarre experience which may have all kinds of different meanings and implications, including the fact that it's such an intense idea that it may kind of build into an otherwise rather inexplicable experience, may turn into that simply because of suggestion. There's just all kinds of, there's a lot of real muddy water here that needs to be cleared up desperately, and it's going to take a concerted effort on the part of a number of different sciences to do that. But I do point out in the book different areas of research that could be carried out that are primarily physical in nature, including research into memory, that would help to give us some clear answers so that we don't have to theorize off into oblivion about this, and we can start out with a solid foundation.
Do you have a question for Whitley Strieber? Our phone lines are open at 1-800-510-JANE. You're with Jane Houghton Live. Welcome back. Our guest tonight is Whitley Strieber, who claims to have proof that there are aliens among us. His new book is called Confirmation. Let's talk to Ed, who's calling from Brampton. Hi, Ed.
Hi, Jane.
Hi.
Good evening, Mr. Strieber. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
Hi, how are you?
I'm very fine.
Good.
Long before you did Communion, I was a fan of your books. The Hunger was the first book, and I read Wolfen and Nature's End and Wardy and enjoyed it very much. And I've read all your books since then, and I've tried to keep an open mind on this. But one of the things that I find interesting, I wonder if you might comment on it, is that, as you may be aware, one of the rumors was that L. Ron Hubbard started Scientology as a lark, as a joke.
The joke, yes, that trapped him later on a yacht off of in the Adriatic.
Your books are so interesting and so intelligent. I'm just wondering if this isn't a large, elaborate writer's hoax, or if the phenomena isn't as intense as you have made it out to be, but are rather using this as maybe a stepping stone in order to get more response or to find out exactly what's going on?
If I catch the drift of this...
He's accusing you of making money.
No, I'm not accusing you of making money.
Making a hoax.
I don't think L. Ron Hubbard did it if he did it for a hoax. I mean, he wrote science fiction before he did the Scientology, and there are elements in there of truth.
So I'm not sure whether it's accusing you of being a cult leader, which you've been accused of in the past, or just doing this to make money, which you've also been accused of.
Well, there's a few problems with it. The first one of which I think I can point now to confirmation and say that with assurance that there's plenty of evidence out there that this is no hoax. You can't so easily dismiss it anymore as that, and yet it's tempting to do that because it's a hard thing to face. As a culture and a society, we're in denial about this, and we want to be in denial about it. On the one hand. On the other hand, they could not have picked, I guess they could have picked a worse person. They could have picked, say, a professional clown or something to go out and do this. I mean, I'm a horror novelist. A man whose lifeblood was his imagination and thinking up scary things. And then I come out with a scary book, Communion, and I say, oh, it's real. Well, it gives people an out, certainly. They can keep this in question, and I think everyone should keep it in question. I think that's what's healthy about this. If we keep it in question, it's healthy. When we start to believe our own theories, immediately we're in trouble.
But are you telling us the truth?
I'm trying to, but am I? You have to help me find the answer to that question. I don't know it. I honestly don't, and I said it in every single book. I don't know. That's why Communion ends essentially with a group of questions about what this is. This book, Confirmation, is evidence, not proof, but evidence. Evidence is not as compelling. Evidence suggests, proof compels. We will get to the point of proof compelling when science takes us there. If science continues to keep its arms folded, then we will never get there, and we will lose this, whatever it is.
Don't you think there'd be people willing to put up the money to do this kind of thing?
Oh, there are. There's no problem with that.
But you have to have credible scientists who are going to deal with it.
Finding the scientists to do the studies, that's not so easy.
Let's talk to Karina, who's calling from B.C. Hi, Karina.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
Good. Hello, Whitley.
Hi.
I have a very strong question, an unusual question. I don't know. Years ago, I had a pregnancy that went missing. It's been recorded by my doctor. Now, 6 years ago, I had a hysterectomy, and I find myself every once in a while lactating, having a bloated stomach, feeling very pregnant, and then 3 months later, it's gone. Have you heard of anything else?
I would suggest to you that you tell your doctor about these symptoms, because there's a disease called pituitary adenoma that causes symptoms like you're describing with unexpected lactation and so forth, and that should certainly be ruled out in your case. You should go to your doctor, describe the symptoms, and this is not particularly dangerous, this disease, but if you do have it, you should know it, and appropriate steps should be taken to control it.
But have you heard similar stories where the claims are that the aliens have taken the baby?
Yes, the missing pregnancies are somewhat common in this. They're much more common in the UFO literature than there are in the letters we get, I might add. There is, however, mentioned in Confirmation the story of Colette Dowell. Dr. Dowell has a pituitary adenoma and has had close encounters as well, and we, in the course of the book, we try to sort out, and she discusses her life experience, and I think this lady should certainly read that material. And should very definitely take these symptoms to her physician.
You used to think that the internet was going to be the way of communicating all this information, you know, without it being censored. You've turned off the internet now.
Well, I still have a website, and I think there are some very wonderful websites, and I've got links to some of the websites on my website, but there's also an awful lot of bunk out there. There's fake Whitley Strieber interviews and all kinds of things. Oh, sure. There's a whole Whitley Strieber world that of a person who doesn't actually exist. It's just a figment of the internet. And I find that kind of distressing.
And there's nothing you can do about it, sir.
I can complain, but what I've done is, to the interviews, I've made links on my website to the interviews that are real, and the others just aren't real, and so...
You taped an interview with Rosie O'Donnell.
Yes.
It's going to air in July.
Yes.
And you claim it's going to have powerful information.
I think it will be powerful.
What can you tell me?
I think, well, one of the things I can tell you is that Rosie feels strongly that there's something in this and that should be taken more seriously.
But you're also revealing that she was someone that you had been in contact with in the past, but you weren't able to use her name.
That's right. There are many people like that. Many.
And so we'll hear that story.
You'll hear it from Rosie, but never from me.
Okay. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Whitley Strieber's new book is called Confirmation, The Hard Evidence of Aliens Among Us. I'll be right back.